The world's largest economy is borrowing $4 million every minute. And right at that moment, one of its biggest creditor, China, turns away. What happens next? Imagine this. The U.S. Treasury was planning to enter the quarter with $850 billion in cash. In reality, less than half that amount is left in the accounts. And then, the blow hits. China dumps its dollar holdings. $1.7 trillion in U.S. bonds are suddenly thrown onto the market. The dollar crashes. The Treasury, in a panic, borrows another $514 billion just to stay afloat. But this isn't just a financial glitch. It's a signal. To the world, to investors, to allies. A signal that the so-called safe dollar might not be so safe after all. We are standing at the edge of a new economic order. And what happens next could redraw the entire global financial map. America entered Q2 with a confident plan. $850 billion should be in the Treasury's accounts. The reality? A shock. Just $46 billion left. That alone is alarming, but it gets worse. At that very moment, Beijing does what Washington feared most. China begins a massive sell-off of U.S. Treasuries. $1.7 trillion worth. This isn't just a message. It's a direct hit to the very foundation of the dollar system. Markets reacted instantly. The dollar nosedived. Investors began dumping U.S. assets in a panic. Treasury yields skyrocketed, and confidence in American debt wavered. To avoid a liquidity crisis, the U.S. Treasury was forced to urgently borrow $514 billion, more than 3 times the original forecast. Make no mistake, this wasn't an emotional move by China. It was cold, strategic calculation, a direct response to the U.S. using finance as a weapon. Beijing made it clear. If Washington interferes in Chinese IPOs, restricts banks, and tries to dictate rules, it will be hit where it hurts most. This isn't just about money. When the largest holder of U.S. debt starts selling, it's a vote of no confidence. It's like shareholders saying the company's leadership is no longer competent. Now the world is watching. Will anyone else follow China's lead? Saudi Arabia? Japan? India? If these countries also start pulling out of U.S. debt, what happens to interest rates, mortgages, and the dollar itself? As Washington plugs its financial gaps with more debt, the world is rethinking its priorities. The U.S. no longer looks like a reliable anchor of the global financial system. And this is only the beginning. A chain reaction has already started. The question is no longer if the next wave will hit, but when and how hard. The reason behind China's strike wasn't just economic. It was a cold, calculated act of revenge. It started with CATL, the world's largest electric vehicle battery maker, preparing for a major $5.3 billion IPO. It was a landmark event not just for KTL, but for China's entire tech sector. Then Washington stepped in. U.S. authorities suddenly demanded that J.P. Morgan and Bank of America pull out of the deal. The official excuse? KTL's ties to China's defense industry. But in reality, it was a clearly political ban, part of the pressure campaign against Beijing. The banks complied, afraid of the consequences. But China didn't forget. The response came swiftly. Beijing began a mass sell-off of U.S. treasuries. This wasn't just an exit. It was a strike, launched at the very moment America's coffers were already running dry. China pulled hundreds of billions out of U.S. debt, shaking market stability and ramping up pressure on the dollar. The message was clear. If the U.S. weaponizes finance, China will start breaking the weapon itself. But that's just part of the story. The CATL IPO ban is about more than one company. It sent a clear message to all of Chinese business. Wall Street doesn't want you anymore. And now, not just Chinese firms, but companies across Asia and the Middle East are starting to look for alternatives to New York. According to the Wall Street Journal, Asian IPO activity in the U.S. has dropped nearly threefold in the past year. Maybe American regulators thought they were punishing one firm. But in reality, they shook global trust in their financial system. China realized there's no place for it in the old economic order and started building a new one. Now, every step Beijing takes isn't just defense, it's offense. So the main question today is, was this a one-time move, or the first strike in a new financial war. Because if this is just the beginning, Washington may face much deeper shocks than the collapse of a single IPO. Markets didn't just react, they shook. After China's sell-off of U.S. bonds, a chain reaction began. Investors across the globe scrambled to reassess their portfolios. The dollar, once considered a safe haven, began to lose value. In just a few weeks, it dropped 9%, the steepest decline since the financial crisis. Amid this turmoil, gold surged. And that's no surprise. When trust in a currency fades, investors flee to safe haven assets. Gold prices skyrocketed, and central bank demand hit record highs. All signs point to a global search for protection, and clearly, it's not in the dollar. But the most significant impact was felt by everyday Americans. Yields on 10-year treasuries soared past 4.6%. That means anything tied to borrowing became more expensive. Mortgage rates hit 7.8%, auto loans rose to 9.1%, and student loans climbed above 6%, the highest in 15 years. People are borrowing less. Those already in debt are struggling with repayments. The housing market is cooling. Consumer spending is shrinking. And this hurts not just wallets, but confidence. Inflation accelerated again, 3.4% this quarter, up from 2.2%. Prices are rising for food, fuel, and electricity. Everything the U.S. imports now costs more because a weaker dollar means paying more for the same goods. As a result, purchasing power is sharply falling. According to Bloomberg, the average American is losing up to 5% of real income. Middle-income families are hit the hardest, those who don't qualify for aid but can't absorb these price hikes without pain. Markets aren't just crashing in charts. This isn't about numbers on a screen. These are real consequences, felt in every grocery run, every bill, every receipt. China can dump treasuries in seconds, but American families will pay the price for months, if not years. And this is only the beginning. When a country's financial foundation starts to crack, the shock doesn't stay in Washington. It echoes throughout the economy, from Wall Street to the smallest rural supermarket. While Washington tries to contain the fallout from China's strike, a new wave is building, this time from allies. Those once considered America's reliable backbone are quietly stepping away. In just the first quarter of 2025, foreign investors sold off $317 billion in U.S. assets, the largest capital outflow since 2016. Saudi Arabia, one of the biggest holders of U.S. treasuries, slashed its holdings by 22% in just a few months. And this wasn't a random move. It was a message. Even close partners are no longer confident in the dollar's future. Amid rising geopolitical tensions, sanctions, and trade wars, global players are hedging their bets. No one wants to rely on a system that can be shut down with a single order from the White House. That's why interest in alternative exchanges is rising. Asian companies once rushed to IPOs in New York. Now? In 2025, only 28% of Asian firms chose U.S. exchanges. 3 years ago, it was 75%. Tokyo and Frankfurt are gaining momentum. Europe is actively building platforms where companies can operate without fear of sanctions. And Beijing, partnering with Brussels and other capitals, is going further, constructing entire financial systems designed to bypass the dollar. Not just temporary alternatives, but a full financial architecture that can function without the US SWIFT no longer looks untouchable. China is rapidly expanding its own payment networks. BRICS nations are testing BRICS Pay, which has already processed $56.4 billion, nearly half of it in local currencies. The world is slowly but surely learning to live without the dollar. And it's not because they want to hurt America. It's because they no longer trust it. When your allies, not your enemies, begin to walk away, this isn't politics. It's a warning bell. If the U.S. continues using the dollar as a weapon instead of a global symbol of trust, the world may have no choice but to leave. Not with fanfare or fury, but quietly. Calculated, deliberate. While the U.S. sinks deeper into debt and loses the trust of its allies, China is doing something Washington never expected. It's not just retaliating. It's building a new system, one that is